Alright, so we're going to continue Hilchas Mikvaot, Siman Reish Aleph. We're holding Seed Vav, we'll do Vav Zayin Ches Hashem, and perhaps even Tes, What we know so far is the amount of water that's required in a regular mikveh as opposed to a mayan, which has certain advantages, certain benefits. Nonetheless, midrabanan, one has to be completely covered by the waters. There can be situations, however, whether it's a mayan or a mikveh, that we're dealing with not something in the ground, not an ocean, not a lake, not a river, or not even something that was built from scratch, but a vessel. A vessel, a tub of sorts that we want to transform it into a mikveh of sorts. And if it's done properly, it can be kosher. But there's a lot of halachas, a lot of details on how to do it right, how to do it lechatchila, and how it may be kosher b'di'evet. There's also the additional factor of gzeros derabanan that we've spoken about, that sometimes something may be okay, may be acceptable, but because there's a gzeros derabanan that it may resemble something else, people may forget, people may mistake it to be something else, that it's okay. Therefore the chachamim were goyzer not to use it. There are various terms that will come up from time to time in Hilchos Mikvaot that it pays for us to become familiar with. One of them we've already covered, and that's a shaka, in hamshacha actually. A shaka, when the two mikvaot connect, the two bodies of water connect, it is possible for a connection to occur. In other words, for the waters of one bore to become tahor and usable as a result of being connected to the source that is kosher. And there's hamshacha that says that even though something may have been shov, may have been drawn into a keli, which makes it possible because of mayim shuvin, nonetheless there's still a possibility of that shov becoming kosher again if there's hamshacha, if it's somehow dragged along the floor. So there are ways where we can correct the situation. Sometimes it's possible, sometimes it's not. And a term that will come up, at least tonight, is the dimension called shvoferet hanod. The size, a hole the size of shvoferet hanod. Have you heard that? Shvoferet, loosely translated, means the pipe or the tube or the spout that goes into a leather jar that would contain wine in the olden days. That's called nod. Shvoferet is the tube, the spout, the pipe that would fit into or go into a nod, a leather pouch, a leather, jug that would hold wine. It's a certain dimension, and when we are talking about connecting mikvaot or allowing a certain opening to be of a certain size that would make two bodies of water be able to join, we're talking about the diameter of two etzbois that you can move, in all directions. So if you have that diameter in that size of a hole, then that would be called shvoferet hanod. Shoferet hanod is a big shear.
It doesn't seem to be long.
Well, it just means that it's not so hot. Yeah. Shoferet hanod is relatively a big shear compared to other shiurim. If you learn Hilchas Mikvaot from the Mishnayos, or if you in Hilchas Taharas, you will find that there are several shiurim that are used to render a keli tahor. Something could have been tameh, and it can become tahor if there's a hole. In other words, it ceases to be a keli. It ceases to be what it was. It's no longer useful for what it was. And there's different shiurim. A small one, for example, would be kemotzi zayit. As long as the hole is big enough that an olive can fit through it, then it renders it obsolete. In other words, especially we're talking about a hole that is on the base, at the bottom of the keli, not on the wall. Because if it's in the wall, on the sides, it may still be able to hold a certain amount of liquid or whatever it is up until the hole. But if it's at the bottom, then whatever you put in will come out. So it's no longer keli. So it loses the name keli, and then it could become tohor. So kelim are important in mikvois because we know so far that you cannot be toivo in a keli. We've learned that before, that inside the keli, unless of course the keli was completely surrounded by a mayan, in other words with the waters of the mayan inside, that may be a different situation.
Surrounded?
In other words, as opposed to stepping on it. There's a different situation when you are stepping on something, or whether you're completely immersed in a keli that is completely surrounded by the waters of the mikveh.
By surrounded, you mean the outside of the keli?
Yes, completely around
So
it.
bathtub?
Yes, in other words...
So if you put a bathtub in a mayan and...
there would be a difference between a tub, a keli, if it's attached to the ground...
That's something else.
So in a mikveh, but it's attached to the ground, versus not attached, just inside, floating.
But attached to the ground, not attached
Not
to the
attached.
mayan.
What is that?
That's attached to the ground, not attached to the mayan.
No, it's surrounded by the waters of the mayan, or surrounded by the waters of the
What
mikveh.
if it's buried in the ground, attached to the ground?
So that's what I'm saying. There would be a
There's no
difference.
water, and then there's water from the mayan flowing into
But
it.
there would be a gzeira on that. Okay, there would be. That's what I'm saying. There is a gzeira of the chachamim in certain situations, and not in others, because people may come to mistaken it for a regular tub that you have in your
It's
bathroom.
something else.
Right.
So it's kosher, but there's a zero. Doesn't mean.
Exactly. In other words, there's no real difficulty, or there's no real reason defect of why something like that should be no good, because he's in the water, whether it's him or the kelim that he's immersing. But there's a certain zeros derabanan. So anyway, kelim by themselves are not to be used. But it all depends on what kind of a keli we're talking about. Is the keli by itself, in other words, just by itself, like a jacuzzi? Is it by itself? Or is it betoich mayan or a mikveh? Or is it inside a mayan or a mikveh? And it's not connected to them. Keli by itself, the tevilah in it is posel min Torah. Okay, why? Because this is all completely shov. And even though we said that mayim she'uvim, even if they were all she'uvim, it would only be a psul midrabanan, they would still hold that tevilah betoich keli is psula min Torah, because you need the ba'in, and it says that we learn that you need it to be similar to a mayan, just like a mayan is in the karka. So the tevilah has to be, see the Torah's kohanim over there, just like mayan ikora is in the karka. So the same thing with the mikveh, it has to be bakarka. So in that situation, it would be a psul midaraisa. It wouldn't just be midrabanan. If it was a self-standing type of tub. In the following seifim, we will have different kinds of situations where you have kelim that have lost the status of a keli. Can they nonetheless be used for a tevilah, since they've lost the status of a keli? Alright, let's maybe first see seif involved, inside. It is important that the 40 se'ah, that is the minimum required for a kosher mikveh, not be inside a keli, she'en toivlim bekelim. So here he didn't say anything about mayim she'uvim. Now, even if somehow you got the waters to enter there, and they're not she'uvim, ein toivlim bekelim. So the Shach explains, makes a very important distinction here, and that's obviously taken from the Beis Yosef. Therefore a gigit, some sort of tub, shekav'uhu ba'aretz, they actually affixed it to the ground. V'nitmalet mimei shamim, and it got filled from rainwater. Not from the faucet, directly from rainwater. So there's no mayim she'uvim here. Ain't toivim ba. You don't immerse in it, kivan shehoya shem kli aleho, since it already has the name keli. It is already manufactured and has the status of a keli. Koidim shekav'uhu, before he affixed it to the ground. So even though now it's affixed and it's part of the ground, it had the name keli before. Ad kan lo shem tur, mashma im lo hoya leo shem kli, and it's also mashma that if im lo hoya leo shem kli, if it had no name of a keli, in other words, if it was not a keli, koidim shekav'uhu. For example, shekav'uhu eitz o even. Let's say you just made the lining, I guess, of the bore of the pit with wood, with stone, marble. And then you formed it or shaped it into a tub of sorts. That's kosher. The Beis Yosef brings them all down. And that's an important chiluk. That is mashma there. That it depends if it had a name of keli before. It held the name keli. In other words, it still was a keli even as you were fixing it to the ground, versus it was not a keli to begin with, and you fashioned it out once you were building it into the ground. That is a completely different situation. That would be permissible, even though it's becoming a keli. But it wasn't one before. So what do you do? Can there be any way to make a keli, a real keli, kosher? I mean, you don't want to throw away this big tub. You want to incorporate it into construction. Is it still possible? And that's what we were talking about a little bit now. Yeah, you first have to make some holes. You have to undo the name of a keli. Plus, as we will see, according to some opinions, including the Mechaber, you're going to have to affix it to the ground. Alright, so before we see it inside, there's a lot of different opinions in the Mishnah, how to learn the Mishnah, whether it's a cavity in the rock, or versus it's a man-made object. There's all kinds of chilukim, and I don't think we need to get into all of them. We're not learning the Mishnayos right now. But if you were to learn the Mishnah Mikvaot, you will see all kinds of situations. Here we're dealing more with man-made objects. In other words, man is involved, versus something that is more natural in the rock. And still, we have a machlokes rishonim as follows. We're dealing with a situation where we want to take a man-made object that is not kosher for a mikveh, but somehow to make it kosher. And what will be required, according to everyone, is that it would have a hole to render it not a keli. So we can use it for tevilah. So we have a machlokes rishonim as follows. We have, according to the Rash and the Rosh, the way they learn from the Tosefta, that if the hole is at the bottom of this man-made object, it's enough if the hole is just kol shehu. Kol shehu means it's a small little hole, it doesn't have to be a big hole, so that any waters that come inside do not become mayim she'uvim. Right? That it should be mutter to be toivel in there. If the hole is from the side, then the shem keli, the status of keli, remains unless the hole is the size of shvoferet hanod, which we just discussed. The diameter is about 2 inches figure, and this hole has to be towards the bottom as well. Then we have the Rambam that requires 2 conditions, as we will see in the Mechaber. He says it's not enough that you have the hole, and this hole is, according to him, at least the size of motzi zait, that an olive comes out. It's not so big, but it's not so small either. And that you have to do something that shows, that demonstrates that you are fixing it to the ground. You're not just, building around it, but you're doing something that shows that this is pretty much part of the ground. For example, by filling up the hole around with lime, as we will see, with pebbles, making a shape or a form that gives the appearance that this is going to be affixed to the ground, and it's not just a self-standing tub that you are repairing or filling up where the hole is. It has to give the appearance that it's connected to the ground. So that's the Rambam. The Rambam basically says you need those two conditions. It's not just enough to make it no longer a keli, it also has to be fixed to the ground. We have the Ravid that says clearly that you should not immerse in any keli, even if it's connected to a mikveh, unless it's connected through the hole the size of shoferet anod. So if it has that kind of a hole, that kind of a connection, that size, that's fine. Otherwise, you should not be matbil in any keli. And the Gra says that thing as well here, that a lot of poskim just say straight out that you should not be toivel in any keli. But we will see that the Mechaber brings down pretty much the shita of the Rambam here. Haloikeach kli gadol, one who takes a sif zayin, one who takes a big keli, kegon chavit, like a barrel, chavit gdola, big barrel, or areva gdola, or he takes a big trough. Areva is a trough. Now there's different kinds of troughs. There's kneading troughs, there's troughs that animals drink from, eat from. We're talking about an areva gdola, a large one. So it's self-standing. V'nekvo, and he made holes in it. And he made a hole, nekev metaharo. That's all the Mechaber says over here, is that the hole was a nekev that is metaher, this keli. Yeshua, the Ramah is the one that says, the ba'inu nekev keshvoferet anod. Some say that you need that this hole be keshvoferet anod, but here the Mechaber didn't say that. He doesn't make that requirement. He just says clearly, very similar to what the Rambam says. All you need is nekev ametaharo. Now, what's the size of the hole that makes the keli tor? Kemotzi zayit, that an olive can come out from it. That will be sufficient. Some say that you need the nekev keshoferet anod. But the Mechaber says, besides that, the ukvao ba'aretz, and he affixed it to the ground. Ve'asau mikveh arei kasher. Then it's kosher. So we see clearly that the Mechaber mentions the two conditions. To take a man-made object and use it as a mikveh, you would have to have a nekev that makes it tohar, plus putting it into the ground. Now, as we saw before on the shach, this is important that the hole be there because it already has a shem keli. It already was called a keli. So since it was a keli, you need to make that hole to make it to undo the keli. The Mechaber brings two more scenarios that are acceptable. B'cheni pakak hanekev besid ubebinyan eno posel v'hamayim hanikevim betocho mikveh kasher. This first scenario is also acceptable. The next one, not so much, unless he builds it. In other words, he affixes it. In this second scenario, all he did was pakak. He closed off the nekev with seed. Seed is lime. You know what lime is, right? From limestone, mineral. It has many uses. And in those days, and even today to some extent, it was used in construction as a form of plaster. So if he pakak, that means he closed off the nekev with seed, and with, some say, tzrorot, pebbles, all kind of little rocks. Ein posel, it will not make it possible. The waters that will gather inside this mikveh, this particular trough, or whatever it is mikveh kasher. It's a kosher mikveh, because what you're doing here is even though you're closing off the hole, but you're giving it the appearance that you're fixing it to the ground. In other words, you're not just closing off the hole. That's no good. You're covering it up with seed and binyan. However, stamo beseed, if what you did, instead of using just seed, you clogged it with seed or big of seed, you close it off completely with seed or gof seed. Now, the word gof seed, does it ring a bell to you? Gof seed.
How do you spell it?
Gimel pei samach yutov. In English, that would be gypsum. As you can see, this is a Greek word. I think in Greek it's ropsit, something like that. But anyway, once you seal it off completely with seed, in other words, you sealed it, you didn't just put a little bit of seed and sarot, but you sealed it off with seed or gofsit. Gofsit gypsum is wider than lime, and it's a real plaster. Drywall is made of gypsum. It's called gypsum boards. So once you use that kind of a material to seal it off, adayin hu posel ta mikveh, then it would still be posel ta mikveh because it doesn't give the appearance anymore that you're building it. Therefore, you would actually have to affix it to the ground. Or he will build. Until he affixes it to the ground. In other words, you have to have that condition as well, that you affix it to the ground, give the appearance that this is not just a keli by itself, by just, sealing it off, because that's what it appears, that you're fixing it. You would have to affix it to the ground. Whereas in the other one, pakakanekev, the seed, ubebinyan, so the covering up the tub with all those pebbles and all that seed is sufficient. Whereas here, you would need to give it more of an appearance, and that would entail affixing it to the ground or building around it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He gave you three scenarios. In the first case,
right,
he said it must be affixed to the ground and have an open hole.
Yes.
In the second two cases, he still says affixed to the ground, but with a sealed up hole.
Yeah, in other words, that whole area, including the hole, is being covered up, being filled up, and it's clear that it's not just repairing a hole. You can't just repair a hole. It's apparent that you are making it part of the ground. It's becoming a structure that is connected to the ground.
Then why in the first case do you have to have a hole that's open?
Well, that's the conditions that are required to first render it not a keli, and then kova ba'aretz, you have to fix it to the ground. So the Mechaber initially tells us what the conditions are, but then gives us the other scenarios that they would be acceptable if done in a certain way. Then we have another one more. ואם הוליכו על גבי הארץ ועל גבי הסיד ומרח ביתית מן הצדדים הרי זה כשר. Also, if you took it, dragged it on the ground in an area where there's seed, and you smeared it around with mud, in this case clay, from the sides, that is a kosher too. Because what you're doing is you're giving this the appearance, even though you're doing it around the hole too, that this is going to be part of the ground. So as long as that's the appearance that you give it, that's pretty much the second condition that's required to take this, what was original a keli, and make it a kosher mikveh. The hole that renders it a non-keli, plus building it into the ground. There are more ads. Mutar la'asoto al hagag, you can do it over on the roof. Bilvad shelo yeh toch keli, as long as again it's not in a keli or even achaz or one stone. Shechakeko, that he fashioned it, and ulevasof, and later on after fashioning it kavo. But once you assemble many rocks, lo mikre keli. That's not called a keli, because you're basically starting from scratch to build the structure. The real issue is when you start off with a keli. So that's where pipes make a big difference. When you build a mikveh, you have to be careful what kind of piping you use. How's the water getting into the mikveh? And if those kelim are mekabel tumor or not. Imagine if something is called a keli, and while you're transporting the water, or while it's raining, it falls into something, a container of sorts, before it heads to the mikveh. Well, guess what you've done? You've just caused the rainwater, which is kosher water, to become mayim she'uvim, because you placed a filter or something, a metal, right? Where it's catching the water, if it is catching the water. So the one who's designing, the architect, the engineer of the mikveh, has to be very familiar with these halachas of how is the water going to get from the roof. We're talking about rainwater, right? Into the mikveh. That's where the biggest some of the complications can arise, other than the actual bore itself, of having no leakage, or how it is built, especially if you're going to have a separate bore and hashaka, how they are connected, the required amount of water to begin with, after which you can add faucet water too. The drainage of the water, there's a lot of, we'll be talking about some of this.
But you can have a filter.
Oh, sure. Yeah. But where are you going to have the filter? I mean, inside.
No.
Yeah.
We had to have one in Virginia because it was groundwater. And
Sure.
all those other junk was in the water.
Oh, yeah. So one has to know when building a mikveh where to put it. Yeah. Okay, so what we saw was, according to the Mechaber over here, at least in this seif, it was enough to have a nekev amitaharo, whereas the Ramah is the one that said here that you need kishoferet anod. What's interesting, and the Shach has a hard time with this Mechaber, is that he says, wait a minute, I don't understand why the Mechaber said what he said over here in Sif Mem, all the way later on. He says a little bit different. It's not exactly what he said over here. Let me see if I can find it here. Yes, in Sif Mem, it makes a difference between where the nekev is. Is it at the bottom or from the side? Look at what he says. I'm reading from Sif Mem. Ima nekev b'tzdadin, on the side, eno boto mitoras kliyat shir v'rochav nekev k'shoferet adnot, shu k'shtei zvois. Oh, shoferet adnot? Yeah. Well, he didn't say that over here. Here, all he said was nekev amitaro. Enough. Like the Rambam's lashon. That language using in Sif Mem is more like the Rash and the Rosh, that it makes a difference where the hole is. Is it on the side or is it at the bottom? Because kli shenika b'shulav afilu kol shehu eno choshev kli lefsula mikvah in Sif Mem, he writes. If the hole is at the bottom, then that's good. Even a little bit will not make the mikvah possible. It's a good question. How come that the Mechaber appears to contradict himself? And we know he doesn't contradict himself. So there are different explanations as to why he does so. But Rabbi Akiva Eiger gives a very nice answer, and he says it's very simple. Here, when talking about Tevilah, since Tevilah is a Doraisa, to be toivel in it, he was choshesh to the Das Rambam that says that it's not enough that it has a hole. To be toivel in a keli could be a problem over the raisa. So since you're going to be toivel in it, you want to make sure that you affix it to the ground and that you have the hole that is sufficient to render it not keli. Whereas in Sif Mem, he's not talking about being toivel in it. We're talking about a keli there. Over there, we're more concerned with mayim she'uvim. Will the waters that have collected in that keli be considered mayim she'uvim, which is no good? But that's only the Rabbanan according to some poskim, according to actually many poskim. So if that's the case, over there, he will semech on the shitas harash. Nothing about affixing it to the ground. He didn't mention it over there. So over there, he said, it was mechale between where the hole is. Here, he's talking about actually immersing in a keli. It's a problem with the doraisa. It's a keli. So the keli better be affixed to the ground and not be called a keli as long as it has a hole that is metahara. So that's one explanation given to differentiate between this mechaber in Sif Zayin and the one in Sif Mem. Alright, Sif Ches. Mayan shemekalech letoch kli pasul litvol. Then the mayim shebetoch kli ben le'achar sheyotzu min hakli. A lot of these halachas are taken pretty much directly from the Mishnayos. And here we're back to describing a mayan. Now we know the benefits of a mayan. Mayan is always going to have certain benefits over a mikveh. One of them being zoichalin, that the waters can be running. And a little bit of the mayan water can make a lot of the mikveh mayim kosher. It's a mayan, which is metar ben mashu, the kolshem. So here you have an interesting situation where mayan, the mayan itself is mekaleach, is running or flowing into the kli. So it's going into a kli. So even though it's a mayan, we hold, that's the halacha, we hold, like those who say that it's still possible. It's a mayan, but it's flowing into a kli. Possible litvol bo. Ben the mayim shebetoch kli, whether it's the waters that have gathered inside the kli. Ben le'achar sheyotzu min hakli. Even the waters are no longer contained within the kli; they float out. And you might say, well, they're no longer in the kli. No, they were once upon a time, for a moment, in the kli. So even though now they're outside of the kli, it's still no good. All right. Ve'im hamayan mekalech al sfat hakli, but if the mayan, the spring, is flowing on the edge of the kli, it never really entered inside. Uletocho, and also inside. So toch hakli also litboil. Inside the kli is also to immerse. Vechutzala mutar. But outside of it, you would be able to immerse if that would be possible somehow. Even though the waters within the keli are more in volume than the waters that are out, that have flowed over the edge. Edge meaning it has never entered; it just flowed over the edge of the keli. And even though the waters that are coming out now from the tub, from the keli, are more in volume than the waters that came through the edge, those few waters that came through the edge are metaher, the waters that were inside. So what's going on over here? The Rashi explains that me'ikar din, in principle, the chibur, the connection between the mayan, is also machshir, this water that's inside, if it's connected. Me'ikar din. But we're goyzer here. Since this shoykes, since this hole or this container is kavua in its place, and waters are entering it, they were goyzer to make it possible from the din of she'uvim, because of the possibility that people may affix another mikveh or another shoket in the same place, and assume that it's okay if waters have gathered in there. In other words, if they would have fixed there on their own a mikveh, a shoket, where their mayan is connecting, and there would not be a shoferet anod connecting the two, they would assume that it would be okay. And we're not matter that kind of a situation. So according to the Rash, that was the gzera. The gzera had to do with if they on their own would put a keli where where the connection, the hole in between the mayan and the keli is not big enough. Rosh says, yes, it's a gzera, but for a totally different reason. The chashash was that they actually may think that this water is that the waters that have come into this tub would be kosher just because they have 40 se'ah, even though it's a kli, without it being connected to a mayan. In other words, look how far-fetched people might say, well, it was okay when we saw it last time, then what's wrong with this one? Yeah, but this one is not connected to a mayan. It has the same amount of water, but so people may make that mistake and assume that these waters are also kosher in a keli. In other words, they may come to immerse themselves in a keli as a result of it. So since this is a keli, after all, even though it's connected to a mayan and in principle that's okay, people may make the mistake and assume that this water is okay just because it has 40, so even though it's not connected to a mayan. Okay, so those are the two explanations as to why, even though there's a mayan here involved, it's still no good because it's a keli. Either because of the mistake that they may make to assume that any keli that has 40 saw is okay, or like the Rashi explains, that it has more to do with putting there something where the connection to the mayan really is. In other words, there is a mayan, but it does not have the required dimensions of the hole that connects it to, which is shoferet anod. So if you would not have that shear, they would not really be connected. Either way, so it's a gzera. But in the event, in the situation where the waters are flowing over the edge, as the Mishnah says, and as the way it's understood by most of the Meforshim, those waters were never in the keli, so they still are considered waters from a mayan, and therefore they have that special attribute of making the waters that were mayim she'uvin become kosher for mikvah. So as long as you don't immerse in that keli, you're immersing outside of the kelis. Somehow there's a bore there of waters that came over the edge. So even though it's the edge, but it's the edge, it's not a keli, then that's completely okay. All right, that's pretty much it. The Basar goes a little bit more into the machlekes rishonim as to what exactly is going on over here. Rambam, just quickly, the Rambam and the Rosh hold that the waters that come out from the keli remain pasul. And therefore, even though they're no longer in the keli, they remain pasul. So unless you have new waters coming from the edge, they will remain pasul, and you cannot immerse in them. The Rashba learns from the Mishnah that the waters, the way he understood the Mishnah, the waters that came through the edge are kosher, and that is why any waters that are outside are kosher. That's the way he understood the Mishnah, the scenario is just that the waters came from the edge. So therefore the waters on the outside are kosher. Just another way of learning the Mishnah. But the halacha, we see that the mechaber was only matter if they actually came over the edge. And then those waters can be matar the other waters that came out. Otherwise, the other waters that came out, even though they originally were from a mayan, the fact that they came into a keli makes them mayim she'uvin. Seif Teth, a very interesting seif, and in some ways it's relevant. Here, it's not so much talking about an individual going inside the mikveh, it's talking about kelim. After all, we sometimes take kelim to the mikveh. We take kelim that we bought from a non-Jew, kelim that require tevilah. But during the days where they had hilchos tumah v'tahara, where kelim were actually kelim tmeim, they needed to be immersed in the mikveh for reasons of tumah, other than having been bought from a goy. So this is a very interesting halacha here, and it's not so. If you read it, you may not, without learning through the Mishnayos, you may not understand what's going on here. Keli tome, you have a keli that is tome. It's a big keli. It could hold additional kelim, smaller ones. So you have a keli tome, shenosan b'toicho kelim acherim, that you went ahead and put other kelim inside of it. The heat milakol, and he was toivel everything together. Also lahem tevilah, the tevilah counts for all of them, even though they're inside another keli. Afal pi shepia keli, even though the opening the spout, the opening of the outer keli, tsar beyoter. It's very narrow. Then how come it's okay? The waters will enter it. And since the tefillah counts for the big keli, also tefillah lekelim shebetoicho, then the tefillah also counts for the kelim that are inside, the smaller ones. However, don't think that that's always possible or always acceptable. If you inclined it, the big keli, on its side, versus allowing the waters to come in from the top, holding it straight with the opening the mouth towards the top. If instead he inclined it on the side, the hidbil, and he was toivel the whole thing, lo also lahem tefillah, then the tefillah does not count. Here again we find the term shvoferet anod. Until the opening, the mouth of the bigger keli is the size of shvoferet anod. The same is, even if the keli, the outer keli, the bigger keli was clean, it doesn't need a mikveh. And you put inside of it, you put inside of it kelim tumeim, unclean tumeim, hidbilan, and he immersed them. Lo also lahem tevilah, the tefillah doesn't count, until the opening is wide as shvoferet anod. And here it doesn't say about leaning it. Nothing. The fact that it's a clean keli is a disadvantage. And that's one of the things we have to understand. What's the difference if that external keli is a keli tohar versus if it's a keli tomeh? It appears to be that if it's a keli tomeh itself, you're better off than if the keli that is being used as a container is tohar. In that case, you need shvoferet anod. So before we explain, let's just quickly read the Ramah. Ramah says, "Mutar litbol kelim besav." You have a lot of cutlery, for example. That's the way we do it today. You're allowed to be toivelet in a sal, in a basket, or besak, some sort of a sack, as long as it's perforated. The kivan de'eno machzik mayim, since it doesn't hold water. Adif tfei minukav keshvoferet anod. This kind of a basket that does not hold water is even better than something that holds water but has a hole the size of shvoferet anod. That's the Ramah. The Ramah is telling us, if you have those kind of situations where you have to be toivel a lot of things, small items, you don't want them to drop down to the mikveh at the bottom, a knife or whatever, put them in a basket, go ahead. As long as it's perfect, it doesn't hold water, that's the best solution. But what is going on over here? So this halacha, the makor, this halacha is also from the Mishnah. And over there's a chiluk. We see that there's a chiluk, there's an nafkamina, if you're being toivel and mitaher, the external keli as well, or you're not. The external keli does not need a mikveh. You're just using it as a container. So the machlokes rishonim is as follows. The Rambam held that what was learned in the Mishnah, what was also brought down in the Tosefta, that when the keli is facing up, all you need is just a little bit of an opening, versus when you tilt the keli on the side. That's only talking about the situation where the keli, the external keli, is tomeh. If the keli, the external keli, is tohar, you need keshvoferet anod. And even when the keli is tomeh, if you tilt it, you still need shvoferet anod. The Rash and the Rash will just say that in the Tosefta, the chiluk was if the keli is up or whether it's tilted. But we're talking about a keli tahar. No differentiation over there. Keli tahar, keli tahar.
By the way, interestingly, they translate here shvoferet anod, bladder spout.
A bladder?
A bladder spout.
Okay, and that would be, I'm not sure. Yeah. Okay, so what exactly is the difference? Now we do know the basic difference. When something is facing up, the waters are flowing over it. There's a real connection. You're tilting it, there's no real connection. Practically speaking, if you take a tea kettle that has a spout, well, with a tea kettle you can just open up the top. But if you had anything that has a spout, you want to fill it up with water, facing up and not facing down. When you put something facing down or on the side, you risk that the waters will not enter it completely. There's going to be more air. So you want to make sure that the waters get in if you have this kind of a situation. So that's the basic difference between how it's situated, where ideally it's better situated with the opening facing up than on the side. Tilting it on the side, you would need a bigger hole therefore. But what's unique about this is, why make this distinction between a keli tom and a keli tor? All they say is that once, if your keli is tom, since the tevilah was good or worked for the external keli that needed the tevilah, it also works for all the little kelim that may be inside. That's all they say. I thought that the Tosfos Rid gives a very insightful explanation here as to what the difference between a kli tor and a kli toma would be. We're talking about the process of tahara here. If the external keli is tahor, that means it does not need the water for itself. If that's the case, the way he explains it is, that external keli is acting as a container which makes the waters enter it mayim she'uvim. Incredible. The problem with this is, it's a big chiddush. Waters in a keli that you put into a mikveh do not become mayim she'uvim unless you first take him out of the mikveh. You see what the problem with this is? If you keep it down there, if you put a keli inside a bucket in there, and you put stuff in there, it's not mayim she'uvim, it's still the same water, it's the mayim of the mikveh. You took out this water, it's something else. You took it out of the water, that's a different story, but as long as it's in, so it's a chiddush that he says over here. I don't think everybody agrees with him. But at least he gives us a direction here. He says the fact that the external keli is tor, that this procedure that we're doing is not for itself, it's for the inside. So it's acting as a container. If it's acting as a container, you need kishvoferet anod. Unless, what?
It would seem that the function of the object keli to the kelim inside, that the relationship between the two has nothing to do with whether or not the outside keli is being toiled as well.
Right. That's what I was.
Well, it's just logically thinking, what difference does it make whether the outside keli is being toiled as well or not with respect to its relationship to the kelim inside?
Exactly. So that's the chiddush.
So why does it make a difference?
Yeah, that's the chiddush over here. That if you don't tilt it, then it's okay. So we say, if you don't tilt it, once the outside becomes tahor, because it was tomeh, so does the inside, along with it, become tahor. If you tilt it, it's just a matter of a bigger connection. That's all it is. If you tilt it, you need a shloferes anot to connect everything well. But otherwise, if it's facing up, you're right. It works for the outside, it works for the inside kelim that are inside too. What's interesting is, however, that if it's not tomeh,
that's the point,
and it does not really need a tahara for itself, then we say, no. You're acting as a container here, you're not really becoming tahor yourself, so we don't apply that logic. You became tahor, so did everything inside of you become tahor. Since you don't need it, you're tahor, the outside keli is tahor, then you need a shvoferet anod.
You could say hypothetically, although one could say hypothetically, it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but one could say hypothetically, if the outer keli was tameh,
right, then
being immersed with the kelim inside would be sufficient to give entire it as well as the kelim inside.
Yes.
At kama v'kama, then when the outside keli doesn't even need to be.
That's what I would think,
yeah.
Right?
So
usually we would think that way.
No one makes any statement regarding why the fact that the outside keli is tahor, why that suddenly forces the requirement of a larger spout.
No, so that's what we just gave the basic explanation that, once it itself needs a tahara. So we say everything inside becomes tahara, memela.
Why don't we go back to...
Even though remember, we're talking about a small hole. That's the thing.
That's what I want.
Yeah, if you have a shoferet anod, it's not a problem. Yeah.
Why don't we go back to the original one?
Right.
You can't use a table
Right.
to title yourself,
Right.
right? Unless there's the shoferet hanod.
Also, right.
Right. So here, why should the kalim be any different than you? The kalim are in a clay,
Yeah, clear. Yeah.
right? If you want to do a clay,
Right.
so you need the shoferet hanod.
Yeah, but you're right. But we said we don't need a shoferet anod if the external keli
That
is tameh and is facing up.
right.
Yes, that's why let's say
So
one.
once you have that exception, why do then you have an exception on the exception?
Yeah. So it's interesting. There's not that much discussion that I've seen so far, except for this additional places read that I thought was interesting because of what he says.
But George might be onto something.
Yeah.
Maybe it's really...
It could be
Maybe
related.
it's really that the second case, where the outside keli is not tameh, it's
Right.
power, maybe that's the normal case. Normally you would need the shoferet hanod.
Right.
But in the special case where the outside keli is tameh,
It's tameh. That's we say
maybe
migoy.
that is a defect of sorts in the keli as well. At least because a tameh keli can't be used for certain things.
Right. So therefore.
So therefore, it has a status similar to a keli that has a hole in the bottom, which isn't a keli.
Right.
And therefore, it does not prevent the keli inside from becoming tower. Like one would be able to climb into a bathtub that has holes in the bottom where
Yeah, but the fact is, it doesn't. So it doesn't prevent.
So it doesn't need the same stringencies as a keli that is perfect, that is undamaged. Only here the damage is a more...
Right. In other words, there's more of a stringency. There's more of a stringency in that which is a tohar. Yeah. Yeah. Apparently there are.
No, it doesn't need too much since I...
No. There are possibly these kind of differences of why we're machmir here or there. Either way, for our purposes, as long as the waters can get in.
Or maybe much more simply for a practical reason. A person who's dealing with an outer keli that is tameh
Right.
will be much more careful about immersing it properly than if he's dealing with an outer keli that's tower. I mean, he's not...
Well, either way, the point is that even if you didn't have too much of a connection, all it was a small opening, it was facing up, we say that it could work. So that's also in itself a chiddush. In other words, it's piv tzar, the mouth, the opening is tzar.
Yeah. And then that has to be facing up.
It has to be facing
But
up.
if you put it on the side, all of a sudden
Yeah. So that is for practical reasons in the sense. The real chidush here is not so much the leaning, it's much more that
you have an exception.
you have an exception, yeah. Since it worked for it sufficiently, with that size opening, then it's okay. We're not machmer to require more. But if it's external keli is tohar, obviously that we're going to be more machmer for whatever reason. Okay, we'll stop here.